Good morning to you, sir.
Morning.
I want to kind of go down the road of the investigation, and the investigation has taken on several different veins of its own. We've got the Mueller investigation, and then we've got the Manafort situation, the Papadopoulos. General Mike Flynn will be sentenced today. There are some people in la-la land, because I don't think there's a chance of this, that this radical judge or this judge who has given some fairly radical decisions at times. I don't think he's a radical judge, but he has done some very unconventional things over time. There are some people out there who believe there's a slim chance that this will get thrown out of court. You respond to that how?
I think that there's going to be some kind of a sentence here. I don't see it being thrown out.
And I agree.
Yeah. What the sentence will be is anybody's guess. I know that there's been talk about giving him no jail time, but it'll be up to the judge to make that decision.
Scott, do you agree that General Flynn is a different animal than Manafort or Papadopoulos? I mean, Mike Flynn has a fairly distinguished military career and life that he's built basically on honor and integrity. He chose to get in bed with the president. Mm-hmm. That is very once again with the word unconventional. But it just seems to me that there was a commonality with Papadopoulos and Manafort and Cohen. They were kind of sleazy before they ever bumped into Donald Trump. And they were more than willing to be as sleazy as Trump wanted them to be or allowed them to be. With Flynn, I look at him a little bit differently. There's nothing in his past history to suggest he's the kind of character that some of these others are.
In the sense that we set a very high standard for people in our military.
Okay.
We expect them to follow a certain code of conduct, and we get very offended when that doesn't happen. And certainly in the case of Flynn, he did go down a road he should not have. In that respect, he
became a member of Team Trump.
Yes, yeah. And he's going to pay the price for that. What the price will be is anybody's guess. I know that he has been outspoken in the past about, for instance, Obama's policies, but there is this assumption, I think, among many Americans that those people who are in the military, we expect more of them than maybe we do somebody who's not, if that makes sense.
And I don't deny that, and I don't dispute that. But what I would argue to the contrary is, how do you become a general if you don't distinguish yourself? And what I'd call a meritocracy. I mean, in the military, you're rewarded for what you do. So when you say that we hold people like Flynn to a high standard, it's pretty obvious he's met that high standard because he's become a general. And very few military men or women become generals.
True. Now, there have been cases of generals who have gotten in trouble for a variety of reasons, be it sexual harassment or the like. But absolutely, there is this expectation that you've met certain requirements, certain standards, to get promoted to the point that you do become a general. And so, yes, there is that the meritocracy that's there, the expectations that he has met those requirements. And so it's unfortunate that he now finds himself going down this path where he could face time in jail.
But what do you say to someone like the Rev and I, who are Trumpsters? I mean, we're still on Team Trump. What do you say to us when we argue that the only reason Flynn has trouble is because he chose to be on Team Trump? It's not that he misled an FBI agent or an investigator. We would argue he was coerced. He was never formally told he was being investigated. There was a very nonchalant way they dealt with him in the very early stages of the administration. What we would argue, Scott, is the reason Flynn has problems is not what he did, but who he associated with.
Then what you're saying there then is that anybody who breaks the law, well, let's look and see who they associate with. And then that determines whether, in fact, they're going to get a certain punishment. The fact of the matter is he broke the law. And if you're a believer in rule of law, then he must be punished for that. I mean, to go out I have students who plagiarize on papers. Okay. And they'll say to me, well, I didn't realize that I had done something wrong by plagiarizing. Well, I'm sorry, but number one, it's discussed in class. But number two, it's still a violation of not just a code of conduct, but it's something that gets yourself in very serious trouble. Stephen Ambrose, the very famous historian on whose works things like Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers were made, got himself in very hot water for plagiarism. He made the argument, well, it was an accident. It was still a violation. And so you have to pay the price.
So did Hillary Clinton lie to investigators? I mean, she was not under oath. She was not asked to be under oath. Here's where I'm headed, and you know where I'm headed because this is the argument the Trump team makes. There's two sets of standards. There's a set of standards if you affiliate or associate with Donald Trump, and there's another set of standards if you remember the resistance, the anti-Trump movement. And you got to be honest, you know this. You know there's a deep divide in Washington. And the biggest division today is those who support the president and his administration and those that don't. I don't disagree that if you mislead or you lie, dishonest with a federal investigator, there is a price to be paid for that. That is the rule of law, and we must always honor the rule of law. But the rule of law is being applied incredibly inconsistently when it comes to Flynn, because Flynn was not told he was being investigated. Hillary knew she was being investigated. There's fairly factual accounts of her misleading federal investigators, and there is no punishment there. So it's not the fact that Flynn is being dealt with as he is. It's the fact that Flynn is being dealt with as he is, and people who don't associate with Trump are dealt in a very different way.
Well, first of all, you know I have no love lost for the Clintons.
I know you don't. And you made that very clear.
And I've even said that I think that there should be investigations into, for instance, what happened between Loretta Lynch and Bill Clinton on that plane. But it is going to be up to those individuals who are involved in upholding the law, prosecutors, for instance, to make the determination whether, in fact, the law was broken to the extent that it requires some kind of a trial or jail time or the like. With Hillary Clinton, apparently they have not found that yet. I'm not saying that doesn't mean there won't be an investigation at some point down the road. Maybe there will be, but at this point they have not found enough evidence to justify any kind of bringing any kind of criminal charges against her. With Flynn, they have.
But don't we have pretty good evidence that she misled investigators in relation to transmitting classified information on a personal server? That is a felony. We know that. I mean, there is no doubt when you traffic in classified information in an unsecured private server, that is a violation of federal code. We know she did that.
But there's also, it says in the federal code, there has to be intent, that you knowingly intended to do that. And that's where the prosecutors found a difficulty in terms of bringing charges against her.
And I would argue that's where the prosecutors cut her some slack because she's a member of the resistance. That's where you and I have a fundamental disagreement. I'm not disagreeing with you that if Flynn lied to the investigators, no matter what the circumstances were, that there's a price to be paid for that. We are a nation of rules and laws, and I mean, when you break the law, I've lived some of that. I mean, I've lived a lot of that in my business life, professional life, private life, political life, and I get that. I just think the problem the Rev and I have, and I'm using him because we're sitting here together, is that the two sets of standards that appear to us to be very much in play. You're dealing with anybody associated with Trump one way, and you're dealing with everybody else the other way. And I think you understand that.
I understand that. And I think it would be, if we had President Clinton right now and the roles were reversed, you'd probably have Democrats saying this is not fair. Why are her affiliates being gone after? Why are people going after her affiliates and not going after Trump's? There is that political divide there. But again, in the case of Hillary Clinton, there's the issue of intent. And as long as the prosecutors believe they cannot meet the standard, the legal standard that shows intent, then it becomes very hard, as far as they're concerned, to bring charges against her.
Okay, did Donald Trump break the law in paying two women to be quiet about an affair they had whenever they had that affair?
Right now, he's an unindicted co-conspirator.
What does that mean in your liberal imagination?
It means that there's an assumption that there's a law was broken.
Okay,
but I think there's still a question as to whether there's enough evidence to actually prove that. You still need the smoking gun.
You believe, I mean, you've made your mind up. You believe that a wealthy businessman running for office pays two women to keep their mouth shut. You believe that's a crime.
If there was a violation of campaign finance law, yes, it was a crime.
But what if Donald Trump was doing that because he was embarrassed about it and didn't want his wife to know about it, his kids to know about it, and his son-in-law to know about it, and his business empire to be smeared by that? I mean, isn't that the more appropriate thought? But because Donald Trump kind of has a history of doing things like this. In other words, I think you're going to have a hard time convincing the American public that was all about campaign finance. That's what crazy rich entrepreneurs do to keep women they had affairs with. I'm not saying I condone it. Please understand, I'm not saying I'm for the president being like that. But we've got a guy that's very different and lived a very different sort of pre-presidential life. I don't see a crime there. I just don't. I think it's very consistent with what people like Donald Trump have done, whether they're seeking office or not. And I think he does it whether he's running for president or not.
Well, there's a few things there, and this is where we're still getting the information. Number one is the fact that Michael Cohen says that Trump did knowingly know that he was getting involved in breaking the law here.
But let me interrupt you, but I think you would agree that Michael Cohen was willing to say a lot of things if they were giving him a shorter jail sentence.
Well, and that's one of the things we'd have to look at is right now, it's kind of right now a he said versus he said, although Cohen would probably not be facing 3 years in prison if there was not additional evidence to prove that, in fact, there was a violation of the law. Plus, there's a lot of stuff in the testimony that he's given that's been redacted, and still information so obviously there's information we don't know. Second of all, if Trump paid those women with the knowledge that it was designed to influence votes, that too would be a violation of campaign finance law. It's designed to make voters vote a certain way. But again, they're still gathering evidence. There's still a lot out there. That's why I said last week, I don't believe there's enough at this point to impeach the president.
Last question. Are you okay? I'm not. I'm going to make it very clear to you I'm not. I'm not okay living in a country where a special prosecutor has full autonomy and authority to go after whatever they choose to go after. With the blessings of our federal government, where they begin down the road of whether or not a presidential campaign complicitly colluded with a foreign government to influence the outcome of the election. 2 years later, we end up with whether or not Donald Trump violated campaign finance law in paying two women to keep their mouth shut. I don't want any part of that country. To me, that's not what the federal government's about. That's not what it's intended for. You had clear marching orders, Bob Mueller, and your job was to go find out whether or not Donald Trump or his campaign colluded with the Russian government in influencing the outcome of the election. 2 years later, you're talking about evidence. There is no evidence of that. May have a handful of evidence, may have a lot of evidence, may have a big satchel full of evidence. But right now, we know that the only exposure Donald Trump has is the issue relating to paying women to keep their mouth shut. You can have an opinion of that or not. You can say that's a violation of campaign finance law or not. My point is, are you okay with a single prosecutor having that sort of authority with the blessings of our federal government?
Well, number one, the question would have to be, what if the tables were turned and talk about President Hillary Clinton? Would Republicans who are upset with what's happening right now with the Mueller investigation be as unhappy if the investigation was of President Clinton?
But you're kind of arguing two wrongs make a right.
Well, no, I see what you're getting at, but then that brings me to my second point, and that is the mandate is clear. If you read the mandate that was given to Mueller by Rod Rosenstein, a Trump appointee, it says that he is to investigate whether there was, in fact, any kind of collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russians, and anything that comes out of that investigation. It's a very broad mandate. And so unless there was something in that mandate which said you cannot go down that road, then I have no problem with it.
You're okay with the broad mandate?
If that's what the mandate says, then fine. If the mandate said you were only allowed to look at this, then I might have some questions, but then I would have to look at the question of discovery.
And that's where you and I fundamentally disagree. I'm not okay with the broad mandate.
But there's also
I'm not okay with giving a special counsel full autonomy and authority to basically go find a person and revisit his last 20 years or 25 years on Earth and find everything he's ever done wrong just because he's caught up in the web of Donald Trump winning the election.
Well, can I ask you a question then? If there was a limited mandate, if it was only to look at collusion, but through the process of discovery, there was evidence found which pointed to violations of campaign finance law, then should the special investigator be allowed to go down that road?
In my humble opinion, no. I mean, I would give very limited discretion to the special counsel. Your job is to go find out whether Russia tried to influence the election, and if the Trump campaign were associated in any way, shape, or form. That would have been the man. If I were the guy that signed off on the document, there is no way I would have given Bob Mueller or anybody, Ken Starr for that matter. I mean, the way we ended up with Monica Lewinsky was a special counsel investigation. I'm just saying, giving that broad authority and discretion to one human being. And I have found this in the first person. I'm the only person in this room that has lived this. If you give the ability to indict or intimidate into the hands of a politically motivated individual, It is the most threatening thing in a free society that you, I, Rev, or Alec will ever encounter.